Alors, petit changement en ce qui concerne l'ordre de passage des conférenciers. Premier élément, M. Jean Sigler, lorsqu'il avait dit oui pour être keynote speaker à notre conférence, avait émis une réserve en nous disant « Cette semaine, je risque d'être appelé par le secrétaire général Ban Ki-moon de l'Organisation des Nations Unies, donc à New York. » Malheureusement, c'est le cas, donc M. Jean Sigler, le professeur Sigler, ne sera pas parmi nous, mais il pense bien à nous. Corinne Lepage va arriver, mais je crois que compte tenu de ce qui se passe en France en termes de grève, elle a un peu de retard, donc on espère qu'elle arrive même vous délivrer son message. Donc, nous allons passer directement au message de M. Martin Lees. Alors, Martin Lees is currently Senior Advisor to the President of COP20 on Climate Change and Rector Emeritus of the University for Peace of the United Nations. Martin Lees has been Assistant Secretary General for Science and Technology for Development in the UN and Secretary General of the Club of Rome. This is a very prominent speaker, so Mr. Lees, you have the floor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure and an honor to make this presentation to you today at this critical juncture in world affairs as the world community strives to lay the foundations of a green, sustainable and inclusive global economy. It is most appropriate that we should meet here in the city of Geneva, which has been identified for decades with the efforts of the community of nations to advance human rights, peace and cooperation, and as we have just heard from the mayor, to undertake very effective and rapid action in regard to environmental and climate issues. I have been asked to provide you with a swift overview of the state of the world in environmental and social terms, and then I will sketch some key issues in the field of climate change as we move towards Paris 2015, and I will draw on the conclusions of a high-level international task force which was convened by President Gorbachev within the framework of Green Cross International, and the report of that task force is available, called Facing the Realities of Climate Change. Ladies and gentlemen, global economic growth has undoubtedly produced enormous benefits for hundreds of millions of people in both developing and developed countries. Many of us are privileged to enjoy a standard of living unprecedented in human history. But at the start of the 21st century, we should have no illusions. We are heading fast into a gathering storm of connected environmental, economic, social, and political challenges. The future, of course, is not preordained. It will be determined by our choices and by our actions, if that is, we act in time. But time is running out. The issues which confront the world community today are on an unprecedented scale, with truly global implications. They are intensifying fast, and because they are interconnected and systemic, they will behave individually and together in non-linear ways. We face, therefore, a future not of steady, predictable trends, but of escalating risks of major disruptions and of rapid, unpredictable change. This is particularly true of the climate issue. We have negotiated without significant effect for more than 20 years and now face real risks of climate destabilization. The present models of economic growth to which we remain committed are failing. They are failing not only in environmental and social terms, but also even in economic terms. We cannot, in fact, solve the problems of the 21st century with the tools of the 20th. It is clear that we badly need new ideas and new approaches to organization if we are sustainable and equitable progress for a world population which will rise to well over 9 billion people by 2050. Governments alone, of course, cannot resolve the climate, environmental, and social threaten the future. These have deep roots in our values, our behavior, economies, and our societies. But on a more positive note, there are huge potentials of creativity, knowledge, scientific and technological capacities, and resources of all kinds which could be intelligently deployed to create a more just, stable, and sustainable world. I hope that this conference will set out some lines of action to mobilize these capabilities in the interests of all of humanity. Practical examples and commitments across the world in states, in cities, in businesses and communities, and in civil society all demonstrate that resource-efficient, low-carbon, equitable, and inclusive paths of development are feasible, and also that they can be economically beneficial. If, however, we continue on a business-as-usual path, the human, environmental, and economic consequences will be devastating for both future and present generations. Sorry. Stuck together. This raises, ladies and gentlemen, an obvious question. Remain committed to a path of world development which is clearly failing in environmental, human, and economic terms when far better paths of development are available. So where are we now, which is the topic of our discussion this morning? According to the World Bank, some 1.3 billion people are trapped in poverty today, while a billion people are living on less than $2 a day, with their basic needs for security, employment, health, food unmet. And the inequalities between rich and poor are widening, both within and between countries. 2% of the richest people in the world own around 50% of the world's wealth, while the poorer half only own 4%. Thus, in a world economy over $70 trillion a year, billions of people in both rich and poor countries are excluded from the benefits of progress. This represents not only a failure of policy and organization, but a vast waste of human capabilities and a profound moral and social failure as well. In this Anthropocene age, the scale of human activities is devastating the environmental and ecological systems on which humanity absolutely depends. This underlines the importance of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which propose a broader framework for action beyond the narrow focus on economic growth as defined by GDP. As pointed out by the Club of Rome in 1972 in Limits to Growth, it is to assume that the global economy can continue to increase exponentially on the present consumption-driven, fossil fuel and resource-intensive base, simply because the injuries to the environment are rendering this path unsustainable. A few points will make this crystal clear. First, according to the list of IUCN, nearly 20,000 species of animals and plants around the globe, that's to say of them have identified, are at risk of extinction. We ourselves, we humans, are provoking the sixth in the past 540 million years. Humanity is in fact overusing the regenerative capacities of the biosphere by some 50% each year. We are in fact using up our biological capital, not only our biological revenue, at the cost of future generations, and this is evidently unsustainable. We are also depleting the energy and physical resources of the planet at an unsustainable rate. Global material extraction has increased 80% in the past 30 years. The fresh water, which is vital to human life and to all the ecosystems on which we depend, is under increasing stress across the world, and water use is doubling every 20 years. The state of the oceans, which support 95% of life on this planet, is also dire. Human impacts have changed the oceans more in the last 30 years than in previous human history. And as a consequence of rising concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere and then in the oceans, mean ocean acidity has increased by 30%. This is a crucial issue with severe consequences for marine life, for human food security, and also for the carbon cycle and thus the global climate. President Gorbachev stressed the links between these. Make one link very clear. Connections between terrestrial ecosystems and climate change are of paramount importance. The natural systems of the biosphere currently absorb around 50% of all our emissions. As they degrade under the assault of humanity, net emissions into the atmosphere increase. Let me now turn more specifically to the realities of climate change. The world is in fact warming fast. The past decade was by far the hottest decade ever measured, and 2014 was the hottest year in the instrumental record until, that is, 2015. The Arctic is at the warmest temperature for 150,000 years, and Arctic sea ice levels are falling fast. And it is the oceans which are absorbing much of the excess heat. The scientific understanding of all the processes at work is supported by the vast majority of scientists competent in the field, and it provides a secure basis for the necessary policies and for precautionary action if we choose to take it. The conclusions of science are clear and compelling and supported by a tide of practical physical evidence across the world, and also by a solid understanding of the paleoclimatic record. Let me summarize the present situation and the future risks. The impacts we see across the world today are the consequences of a temperature rise of only 0.8 degrees Celsius, perhaps 0.9 now. So everything we see happening is 0.8, 0.9 degrees. Since pre-industrial times, reckoned to be 1750. If these consequences today are the result of a temperature rise of 0.8 degrees, we are right to be very concerned about the future impacts of a warming climate in future years. The target of the international negotiations is to hold the temperature rise to 2 degrees. This is not founded on science, this is a political decision. And this is too high. It represents, in fact, the boundary between dangerous climate change and extremely dangerous climate change. And so far, as I have said, over 21 years of negotiations, we have failed to achieve significant results. During this period, the level of greenhouse gas emissions has risen by some 65%, not reduced, but risen by 65%. We are now on a business as usual path towards a devastating rise in global temperature of around 5 degrees if we do nothing. This would entail at least double this rise in critical regions of the world, notably the Arctic, West Antarctic, and high altitudes, with evident consequences for sea level rise. Recent studies of the carbon emissions cuts which are proposed for COP21 conclude that the outcome of the Paris conference will very probably leave the world on a path to a rise of between 3 and 4 degrees of average warming, which would of course have devastating consequences. This presumes, of course, that governments will in fact implement the cuts which they indicate in Paris. When asked What is the difference between a rise of 2 degrees and a rise of 4 degrees? A top climate scientist replied, that's easy. The difference is simply human civilization. Those are the risks, ladies and gentlemen, that we run. Climate negotiations have, in fact, placed immediate issues and perceived political and economic feasibility far above the realities defined by science, which clearly demand urgent action. And they continue to do so. Because of years of delay, the risks of catastrophic climate change have greatly increased, as have the costs of mitigation and adaptation in response to those impacts which are already inevitable. Through denial and delay, we now face the existential threat to the future of the natural world and of our civilization, and we must not make the same mistake again. Climate justice and full participation must lie at the core of any agreement and of any policies to address climate change as a legitimate basis for international action. Poor developing countries are understandably giving priority to economic growth and to the eradication of poverty. They emphasize the historic responsibility of the industrialized countries which generated emissions for centuries in order to achieve their growth in the past. As Prime Minister Modi of India made clear, India will not consent to cut emissions which will undermine our efforts to end poverty. For all these reasons, the preservation of a stable climate is essential if we are to meet the needs of a growing world population and to preserve a decent and peaceful future for all of us in an interdependent world. In reality, there is no choice between development or emissions reduction to avert the threats of climate change. Development and environment must be integrated within one coherent strategy. This is, in fact, the strategy adopted by China, 12th five-year plan, and now again in the 13th five-year plan, to reorient the Chinese economy onto a more sustainable path. We must recognize, as underlined by Pope Francis, the moral and spiritual dimensions of the ecological and climate crises we face, and of our consumption-driven civilization. And we must move from the presumption of human dominion over the earth as a resource to be exploited towards that of custodian and protector of the earth to establish a new relationship with nature and ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that this brief review has clarified the scale and urgency of the threats and risks to the future we face. Let me conclude with 4 brief points. First, climate change is moving faster than anticipated. Scientists have been too cautious. The climate crisis is a reality today. It is not a problem to be put off into the future. Through extreme weather events, droughts, heat waves, floods, and ecological degradation, it is already destroying the lives and hopes of millions of people. And it is reversing the gains, decades of development efforts, and disrupting the complex web of relationships on which our globalized world economy depends. Although they are not responsible, it is the poor and vulnerable of the world who are paying the highest price. As the impacts of climate change intensify, there is a growing risk of violence and leading to humanitarian crises and increasing flows of refugees, with the tragic consequences we see around us today. This underlines the critical links between world peace and climate change, now widely considered in many countries, notably the US and China, as a non-traditional threat to security. But we still continue to spend vast amounts on armaments, $1.7 trillion in 2014, which are the classic response to traditional security threats. And we spend little on what are the greatest threats now: the future of humanity, poverty and inequality, environmental degradation, and climate change. This must change if we are to preserve a peaceful and cooperative world and to achieve the goals stated a month ago in New York of sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps the most significant risk we face is that we are not confronted by a problem of what is generally called global warming, which creates the ice gradual process. We face the real risk of sudden disruption of the complex interlinked systems which drive climate change. Scientists are deeply concerned that a number of self-reinforcing feedback processes are starting up as Arctic sea ice diminishes, as the West Antarctic ice shelf weakens, as methane is emitted from melting permafrost and from beneath the northern oceans, and as forests and marine ecosystems are degraded under the assault of humanity. If we push these systems beyond certain thresholds, we will trigger irreversible climate change beyond human influence. If, therefore, we are to avoid catastrophic outcomes, we must ultimately decarbonize our economies, breaking our addiction to fossil fuel. It is widely recognized that if we are to have a chance, not a 100% chance, but a chance of staying below the 2 degrees target, it is vital to leave a large proportion of proven fossil fuel reserves in the ground. As Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, vast majority of the planet's carbon reserves are unburnable. A global carbon bubble is emerging in the world economy, where stranded asset values in the fossil fuel sector are now overvalued. It is urgent, therefore, to initiate an orderly transition to a climate-secure global energy system, even if we are to avoid the risk of massive financial dislocation. Paris 2015 must unambiguously establish climate change as a top priority for international cooperation and agree on rapid cuts in emissions and on strong and consistent action post-Paris. For all the reasons I have explained, we must finally recognize and respect the clear conclusions of science and push through the radical transformations of our economies and energy systems, which could avert the threat of catastrophic climate change. Leaders must take bold action now to achieve a carbon neutral world by 2050. Perhaps we can use the climate crisis as a catalyst to reinvent our economies, foundations of the resource efficient, prosperous, green and inclusive societies of the future. I hope that this conference can send a strong message to Paris to reinforce the growing movement in favor of effective and rapid action on climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin Lees, for this very interesting speech. So, mesdames et messieurs, vous avez compris qu'on était ce matin dans le constat. We are in the part of where we are now. Now I have to Mr. Peter Poshen. Mr. Poshen is director of the Department of Enterprises of the International Labour Office, and he's also running the program in jobs for ILO. Mr. Poshen, you have the floor.
Good morning, and thank you very much for this invitation. I'm really grateful to the Green Cross for organizing this event and for establishing very clearly already in the title of the event the link between the environmental, economic, and the social, looking at a green economy that would also be inclusive. Martin Lies has done a great job of setting the scene. That saves me quite a bit of talking. What I would like to put to you, perhaps on a more, you're right to be pessimistic, I think, but there's hope, I think. What I would like to put to you in my presentation is that one of the non-state actors, one of the large groups that actually could help us turn around this economy is the world of work. It is entrepreneurs, it's businesses, it's workers. Martin has very elaborately and eloquently set out the scene on the challenges that we face. I'm fully with you in underlining that those challenges are systemic. They are in fact linked, they're not separate. I don't have to belabor the question of climate change anymore and the need to support, to maintain life support systems on Earth. But to add, just you mentioned inequality and persistent poverty as some of the social challenges that continue to be with us. There are others. Why is this not moving? This doesn't. If you happen to be young, then you're likely to be one of the people, more likely to be one of the people disproportionately affected by persistent unemployment. We have over 200 million people in the world today who cannot find a job. We don't quite know how, particularly in the developing world, we're going to create 450 million jobs over the next 10 years, which just will be needed to integrate new job seekers into the labor market. And we know already that many of those jobs are precarious and will have no level of social protection. Perhaps one of the reasons why we're seeing the policy inertia and why also many of us are not changing behaviors is that we do see the two challenges as a bit of a dilemma. We think, and politicians think, that there's basically a choice to be made in economic development creation on the one hand and preserving or restoring the environment and preventing uncontrollable climate change on the other. You mentioned the Indian government and its position, but we have similar thinking in many industrialized countries, at least as an apprehension. Now, we have looked at this question very intensely over the last 10 years, and we arrive at the conclusion that this dilemma does not exist, and that it is perfectly possible to have more and better jobs in an environmentally sustainable environment and economy. You see on the screen three of the major reports that we have put out in the last few years. They contain a wealth of data, a wealth of analysis, but also many, many examples for how the world of work is already contributing to greater sustainability and how that contribution could be boosted. We see three major opportunities as a summary of this analysis globally. One is that a greener economy could create between 15 and 60 million jobs in addition to what we have in the business as usual scenario. So this new economic model that Martin Lies was calling for could actually be richer in employment terms than what we have. It could also massively contribute to reducing poverty. Because if you look at where poverty is today, you see that one of the most exposed sectors is agriculture. We live in a world where still 1 every 3 workers, 1 billion people lives on farms and lives off farms. Those are amongst the most affected by climate change. They are currently the poor. Those are the ones likely to be forced to migrate. Greening agriculture, increasing productivity in sustainable farming systems can be a big step forward. And the third one is widespread social exclusion at the moment. There's huge opportunity to improve energy access. I think Martin Lies mentioned the 1.3 billion people that do not have electricity, but it goes beyond that. It goes to transport, it goes to housing. All of these environmentally sustainable infrastructure could, if it reaches the right people, could do a wonder in terms of social inclusion. Next, please. Just to illustrate this point with a few examples. This is a study that was done on the United States. What would a United States emissions reduction target of minus 40% by 2035 do? It would require about 200 billion per year of investments in energy efficiency and renewable energy. The gross employment gain from that would be over 4 million. The net employment gain would be smaller though, because around 1.5 million jobs would have to be relocated or maybe lost, particularly in energy-intensive sectors. But still, you look at a very, very considerable net gain, which would be enough to reduce unemployment in the United States by 1.5%. 1.5 percentage points, that is. So if you are at 10, you would be at 8.5. Next slide, please. The mayor, I think, in her introduction already mentioned Geneva's efforts to improve energy efficiency in housing. It's a huge opportunity, certainly in the developing economies and in the emerging economies where a lot of new infrastructure is going up. It is perhaps interesting to point out that one of the largest programs to improve energy efficiency in the housing sector, in buildings more broadly, in the world is running in Germany. 120 billion euros have been invested in that program so far, and it was originally proposed to the government by the employers and workers in the construction industry as a win-win-win solution. This is not just something that can be done in industrialized countries. We have taken this idea to Zambia. Africa is a young continent, populations are growing very fast, economies are also growing. If you take the two together, it means that housing needs explode. So you create infrastructure now that does not lock the continent into something that is resource consuming, will gobble up lots of electricity, will waste water, will have difficulties managing waste, etc., etc. So we have set out to help Zambia to develop a sustainable housing construction value chain all the way from the architects and the engineers to the local small enterprises who build those houses. The mayor, I think, also mentioned the social economy as an important element of this future. One example of where that is operating is waste management. In most of the developing world, waste management continues to be a bottom of the stack, informal economy with dismal working conditions for most people. Brazil is no exception from this. About 400,000 people in Brazil are active in waste collection. The government has set out to humanize this activity by formalizing these workers, bringing them together in cooperatives which can be contracted as service providers by local governments. This has massively improved well-being for those workers, and it has also increased the rates of recycling and reuse. So that will be an important step if we are to move to a circular economy. I've spoken at some length about the opportunities in a greener, more inclusive economy, but it is important to also be cognizant and to acknowledge that there are challenges, and that these challenges, I think we need to be explicit about them and we need to address them. We see three big challenges. One is that the transition of enterprises and workers and their communities in what you could call the brown sectors, energy intensive, highly polluting, coal mining, that sort of thing. Something needs to be done to deal with the concerns of these workers and these communities and the politicians who represent them. Otherwise, they will do everything to block change. And in quite a number of countries, they have been successful. A second one is adaptation to climate change. And that was already mentioned previously, that migration, that climate change is becoming one of the main drivers of forced migration. It has a lot the impact of climate change on agriculture, on settlements, on water shortages or flooding. So an urgent need to help communities, enterprises to adapt to that. And the third one is the adverse impact of green policies, because Martin already mentioned inequality as a huge issue. Many policies like energy subsidy reforms, taking away subsidies for fossil energy, for fossil fuels, or increasing the prices of energy, will disproportionately hit poorer households. They consume very little, but a much larger share of their total income goes into energy expenditure. In France, poor households spend 10% of their total income just on heating. That is before electricity, before transport, before everything else. Next, please. I said the world of work has solutions for this, and there's an urgent need to mobilize it to contribute to achieving a greener economy. Here is an example what workers and managers in an enterprise have done. They have done so in the absence of a global climate agreement. They have done it out of their own initiative. An enterprise which most of you know from the post-it notes, but they make many other things, has run a program which they call Pollution Prevention Pays. They've run this program for about 40 years now. Between what it consists of is that the management invites their workers, incentivizes their workers to identify opportunities to reduce emissions, to enhance energy efficiency, to make their processes better. That has enabled them between 1990 and 2011 to reduce emissions by almost 3/4, 72%. They have avoided pollutants, the emission of 1.4 million tons of pollutants since 1974, and all of that has not come at a cost. They have actually had a net saving from taking these measures. They have saved $1.4 billion in the process. Unfortunately, these good examples are few and far between. And that is, I think, something, it is one of our best bets for a short-term, quick win solution. The Paris Agreement will not kick in until 2020. These things we can start doing today. We have discussed this also with the world of work, which is represented at the International Labour Conference, our 186 member countries represented by their ministries of labor and social affairs, their business organizations and their trade unions. And they have committed to help with this change. In the conclusions, they say that sustainable development, including arresting climate change, is only possible with the active participation of the world of work. And they have set out what they call a just transition framework for helping this transition to be socially inclusive. We need country-specific assessments of these social impacts, of the gains in employment terms, in inclusion terms, but also of the potential challenges for it. We need dialogue with policymakers before policy decisions are made, and we need coherent policies all the way down from macroeconomic policies to social protection, skills development, and labor market policies. In order to help countries do that, we have developed and tested a methodology that allows you to ask what-if questions. You can run policy scenarios and think through what their social implications are likely to be on a country-by-country basis. We have also started a network of organizations that can build the capacity in developing countries to do that kind of analysis on their own independently to inform policy making. Next one. And we have joined other UN agencies to create the Partnership for Action on Green Economy called PAGE, where we are coming together to offer turnkey ready solutions with the competencies that United Nations Environment Programme, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, the UN Development Programme, UNITAR, and the ILO bring in terms of economic dimensions, environmental dimensions, and social dimensions of sustainable development. We provide policy analysis or support for that, support to policy implementation, capacity building, and research. And we're currently working in 8 countries, something that we're hoping to step up. Next, please. So here's my key messages to conclude. Environmental sustainability is clearly not an option, but a must. And that is true also from a labor market perspective. As Martin Lees was saying, climate change is already destroying jobs and livelihoods. And if we don't do anything about it, that will only get worse. So cannot address climate change because you need to protect jobs is putting the argument back to front. Second, proactive environmental and climate policies can lead to net employment gains compared to business as usual, plus massive poverty reduction, plus massive social inclusion. The transitions, the downside of this transition and the losses of jobs, the churning in the economies that we are likely to see is probably on a smaller scale than has been feared, but it needs to be recognized and it needs to be managed well. The hardship tends to fall disproportionately on communities that have already been severely affected by globalization, relocation of industries and massive restructuring over the last years, last decades. So measures need to be taken, but we know how that can be addressed. And finally, policies matter. These benefits, to a large extent, are not automatic. A greener economy is not socially inclusive by default, but it can be made socially inclusive by design. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peter Porschen, for your nice message. It is important to have also the explanation from a huge organization like yours. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have to give the floor to the President, Alexandre Licotel. Professor Licotel is the President of Green Cross International. He holds a doctor's in political science from the Moscow State University. And he also international relation masters. In addition to his academic career as professor of political science and international relations, Alexander Licotel served as the European security analyst for the Soviet Union leadership. In 1991, he was appointed spokesman for an advisor to the president of USSR, Michael Gorbachev. After Mr. Gorbachev's resignation, Professor Licotel served as his advisor and spokesman at the Gorbachev Foundation. Becoming in 1996 vice president and after president of Green Cross International, is actively involved in the future sustainable development principle. Mr. Licotel is also member of the Club of Rome and a consular of the World Future Council, member of the World Academy of Art Science Board, a board member of the World Culture Forum. He served also as advisor for the Club of Marriage. Mr. Licotel, Alexander, you have the floor.
Good morning once again. I want to let you know that my outlook, and I would deal with the issues of the COP21, will be maybe a little bit less alarmist than Martin's, but certainly more pessimistic than that of Peter's. And the reason is that I will give you the title of my contribution, and you will immediately see why. The title is The Miracle or Closure, Turning COP21 into Paris Climat 2015. And I mean that if the meeting in December in Paris will remain just another COP meeting. It will lead to the closure of the process ultimately. We need to totally upgrade the process into Paris Climate 2015. That will be the historical name of that meeting rather than COP21. I will start with a short quiz. I'll give you a quote. Try to guess who is the author. The United Nations negotiations are totally unsuited to the climate emergency, and the process must change. Otherwise, the negotiators, who have been there for 15 or 20 years, will continue their folklore. Any guesses? Okay, I will not be tempting you too much, but that is French Environmental Minister, Madame Ségolène Royal, in her article published in Le Monde a year ago. And indeed, if the 20 years of negotiations, I wouldn't say led, but did not have any substantial impact on the process, it raises some doubts whether there are inherent deficiency in the process itself. Albert Einstein once said that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a totally different outcome was the clear definition of insanity. How then we have to assess 20 years long attempts of the climate community to corral the world into a binding CO2 cap deal? I do hope that a deal will be struck in Paris and that it will be more significant than a largely meaningless Copenhagen Accord. Of course, the binding agreement in Paris would facilitate much the process because the states and the governments will be concerned that they are the only ones on the road to sustainable futures. And they will understand that all the countries, all the nations will be in the same condition, in the same transition condition. But at the same time, I think that what is going today in the preparation to COP21 is not very inspiring because I doubt that even if the meeting is successful, it can put the world on the track to 2 degrees Celsius. Because then, if we will have to wait for COP32, 42, and the rest to achieve that. Why I'm saying that? If you analyze today the process of the political statements of the key stakeholders, you will see that there is no legally binding agreement in sight, unfortunately. The French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in September 2013, Laurent Fabius said that the objective was to reach an ambitious, legally binding agreement that would allow the 2 degrees Celsius limit to be respected. In September 2014 in New York, François Hollande stated that the aim was to achieve carbon neutrality. Given what is on the table today, it is an understatement to say that things have gotten off to a bad start. If an agreement is reached in 2015, it will likely not be a legally binding one, nor one that rises to the situation. The US, for instance, does not want a legally binding agreement that establishes international obligations and political commitments on climate. President Obama stated last year that he prefers a legally flexible instrument that encourages states to define and announce their own commitments at regular intervals and in unilateral fashion in terms of emission cuts, funding for any given. This so-called naming and shaming model is premised on allowing countries to achieve international self-satisfaction if their objectives are reached, and censure if they fail to do so. Other governments also share this position. Then, there is no sign the conference takes place in a couple of months, and there is no still sign of any ambitious agreement planned in Paris. In the findings of the IPCC report published on the 2nd of November 2014, if the findings are to be taken seriously, important cuts to greenhouse gas emissions need to be made by 2000. The UNEP report warns that human-related emissions should not reach higher than 44 gigatons of GHG by 2020 as acceptable ways that would allow to a reasonable chance of remaining below the 2 degrees maximum limit increase. However, the current trajectory leads to 57 gigatons of greenhouse gases by 2020. And despite that, no country is considering reviewing and increasing their commitment to cut GHGs by 2020 in order to reduce the 13 gigatons gap between what is desirable and the reality of the situation. The G7 agreement to decarbonize by the end of the century is a welcome step, of course, but 2 is too high. The end of the century is too late. Setting the goals for the end of the century without immediate binding emission targets means transferring the responsibility to the next nations. Moreover, the first commitments made for the post-2020 period are very far from the IPCC recommendations. Thus, the European Union has committed emissions by at least 40% by 2030, whereas the IPCC is calling for the European Union to achieve this level by 2020. The United States has recently committed to cutting emissions by between 26 to 28% by 2025, barely corresponding to a reduction of 0.4% compared with the baseline of 1990. China is committing to reach a maximum level of emissions by 2030, a maximum level of emissions. This is the same as saying that they will break all their current emission records in 2030. The system proposed by the United States and now widely supported, allowing all states to set their own objectives, leads to abandoning the idea of maximum predefined shared carbon budget based on specifically defined recommendations and needs. It calls into question whether the 2 degrees objective is being abandoned today. Beyond the 2 degrees Celsius limit, climate change will become increasingly dramatic. And finally, not last but not least, there is again 2 months ago, there is no much funding in sight. No ambitious agreements is possible without substantial funding. We do understand that. The Green Climate Fund was an outcome of Copenhagen, but it has only just recently become a virtual reality. US 100 billion was pledged to fund the fight against climate change, but only $2 billion was collected in New York recently. The amount announced by François Hollande with quite, upbeat emotions and ceremony is in fact insufficient. And the way in which it will be used remains unclear and contested. Both the United States and Japan have announced that they will pledge $3 billion and $1.5 billion, respectively. Think over how many years they will spread these sums. Other, the United Kingdom and Italy, for example, have done likewise without reaching the sum of $10 billion over 4 years. In other words, the total funds will be only 10% of what was initially pledged. Moreover, there is no guarantee that any future funds would be public, additional, and grant-based. In fact, the climate fund financing will likely be made available as financial instruments such as conditional loans designed for profit accumulation. My question, can we continue relying exclusively on the governments to take action on climate? Even international institutions such as the World Bank have decided not to wait for an international agreement within the United Nations to start implementing climate projects. This, therefore, should encourage us not to focus solely on UNFCCC, but to beyond. And rather than being idealistic, to bet on policies framework that offers long-term solutions and short-term benefits. To achieve this, the world requires a different way of thinking about economy. And the clever euphemism, like green economy or shared sustainable growth, would not help if the system is fundamentally flawed. Making it more efficient or accountable will not resolve the problem. This model locks the world in continuing crisis, social injustice, and the danger of environmental disaster. A rapid transition to a different model is needed. We need a fundamental transformation within a generation in energy, industry, agriculture, fisheries, and transport system, and in producer and consumer behavior. A lot will depend on the transformation of business models. As President Hollande called recently for a miracle climate agreement in December, there must be a business revolution, he said, invoking the French Revolution. And I must say, that's why I'm a little bit more optimistic. It is happening. On May 21st, Saudi Arabian Oil Minister Ali Niami astonished Paris week of the summit on climate by saying that the kingdom built on oil see a fossil fuel phase out this century. Saudi Arabia could phase out fossil fuels, he says, by, I don't know, 2040, 2050, or a little bit later. 2040, okay, that's just 25 years ahead. And just imagine, the kingdom built on oil is ready to switch. Suez, now rebranded as Angie, also unveils a surprise. Gérard Mestralet, the CEO of Suez, who told recently to the World Energy Congress not so long ago that gas can solve all the problems and that renewables must be suppressed, now speaks totally different things. The choice we have made is very clear, he says. We have stopped investing in thermal power generation in Europe, and we're investing in renewables. The leaders of major businesses worldwide called on policymakers to leverage public and private finance to shift to a low carbon economy, introduced carefully designed and predictable carbon pricing, and eliminate fossil fuel subsidies. It was not imaginable even 5 years ago. The summit mobilized over 6.5 million companies from more than 130 countries through 25 business networks who pledged to lead the global transition to a low carbon, climate resilient economy. At the same time, the use of low carbon energy sources is expanding rapidly, and there are signs that growth in the global economy and energy related emissions may be starting to decouple. The global economy grew by around 3% in 2014, but energy-related carbon dioxide emissions stayed flat, the first time in at least 40 years that such an outcome has occurred. Therefore, the peak in global energy-related emissions could be achieved as early as 2020 and at no net economic cost. This is the consideration of the International Energy Agency that published a report on June 15th, the World Energy Outlook. So it is fair to say investors, asset managers, and even central banks and regulators have begun to take note now that fossil industry faces a perfect political and technological storm. Fortunately, many good and workable ideas are relevant technologies are already in the pipeline. Decoupling, circular models, performance economy, collaborative commons, zero marginal cost economy, etc. But in order to maximize our chances to shift toward a sustainable, equitable, and happier world, we will need a couple of things. First, holistic approach, linking development and environment, not just in analysis, but also in governance policies. Economic model transformation rather than its optimization. Decoupling economic growth from energy and raw material use. Enrooting economic growth, enrooting circular and performance economy models by consistent implementation of policies enabling relevant drivers and instruments. Human empowerment at all levels to ensure that the leaders take the adequate decisions, organizations, public and private, support and control the change while the citizens assume and realize their responsibilities. Rights-based approach in a commons-based economy, equity and recognition of limits of planet, coupled with effective means to check and demand the accountability of all stakeholders. Market orientation by valuing natural and social capital. And finally, incentives for net positive transformation of business models. The development of new policies to manage the challenges and to respect the relations of the natural world offers a myriad of positive opportunities to generate the new ideas, new practices, and new partnerships that are needed to overcome the present crisis by reorienting this and restructuring our development model onto a really sustainable, resource efficient path. But however important are economics and technologies, achieving the required level of global systemic change will require true transformative leadership, systemic vision, rather than an adaptive strategy of small steps. We'll need policies reprioritizing toward the goals reflective of new drivers, new uncertainties, and systemic challenges instead of the traditional geopolitical considerations and banal economic growth concerns. In this sense, COP21 must be converted to Paris Climate 2050, extending the agenda to include a whole series of systemic problems and conflicts that are not systematically included. Short of such miracle, COP21 could bring the lengthy project into an inglorious closure. It's time to choose. Thank you.
Thanks very lot, Alexander, for this interesting. Now, I have the pleasure, j'ai le plaisir d'accueillir Madame Corinne Lepage. Alors, quelques mots sur Madame Lepage. Elle est bien connue ici en Suisse et à Genève en particulier. Madame Lepage est avocate, est aussi politicienne française depuis un certain nombre d'années. Elle a été rendue célèbre pour deux bonnes raisons, à savoir qu'en 1978, elle a défendu les victimes de la marée noire due à l'Amoco-Cadix, et en 1999, elle a également défendu les victimes du désastre de l'Erika. Le procès est toujours en cours. Madame Lepage, de l'environnement, 1995, elle a aussi créé un think tank qui s'appelle CAP 21, qui est devenu ensuite un parti politique qu'elle dirige. Madame Lepage enseigne aussi à l'Institut des sciences politiques de Paris, où elle s'occupe justement de la section du développement durable. Si je vous disais que Madame Lepage est connue à Genève, c'est qu'elle s'est occupée il y a quelques années de défendre les intérêts de Genève contre le redémarrage de Superphénix. Vous avez bien réussi, puisque au final, Superphénix est démonté, enfin est en cours de démontage. Et puis tout récemment, Madame Lepage a été renommée pour défendre les intérêts toujours de Genève, mais dans le cadre de la dangerosité de la centrale nucléaire du budget. Donc autant vous dire que Madame Lepage est beaucoup appréciée et aimée ici à Genève. Madame Lepage, je m'arrête là. Ah, encore une chose, peut-être avant de vous passer la parole, le 25 septembre a eu lieu à l'Élysée la remise d'un document sur la Déclaration universelle concernant les droits et responsabilités de l'humanité. Vous avez fait ça, vous avez rendu ce document, ce travail, au président Hollande, qui, semble-t-il, d'après ce que j'ai pu lire, va porter ça près de l'ONU prochainement. Madame Lepage, vous avez la parole et on est heureux de vous écouter.
Ça marche? Oui, ça marche. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Messieurs, c'est un grand honneur que vous me faites en m'invitant aujourd'hui à cette à un moment qui est un moment extrêmement important dont vous venez, Monsieur le Président. Alors, prendre ça, c'est pas grave. Un moment extrêmement important dont vous venez de parler, Monsieur le Président, en vous référant à la COP 21. Je dirais qu'à Paris, en novembre, l'humanité a rendez-vous avec elle-même. Elle a rendez-vous avec elle-même et elle a rendez-vous avec sa responsabilité vis-à-vis de nos jeunes. Et je suis heureuse de les saluer dans cet hémicycle. Nous parlons beaucoup de dettes. La plus grande dette que nous laissons aux jeunes, c'est la dette climatique. Parce que celle-ci, elle met en péril l'humanité elle-même. Et nous serions d'autant plus responsables, j'allais employer un mot fort, j'allais dire criminel, de ne pas agir, que nous avons tous les moyens de le faire. Nous avons les technologies, nous avons l'argent, nous avons les moyens organisationnels qui permettraient que ce soit dans le cadre entrepreneurial, dans le cadre des collectivités locales, dans le cadre de l'aide au développement, dans le cadre de l'électrification des pays qui en ont besoin grâce aux énergies renouvelables, dans le cadre de l'économie circulaire, de l'écologie industrielle. Nous avons tous les moyens de faire. Nous sommes donc totalement irresponsables et criminels si nous ne faisons pas. Faire, ça veut dire agir. Et il y a beaucoup de manières d'agir. La demande que m'a faite le président Hollande au mois de juin de réfléchir à une déclaration universelle des droits de l'humanité qui peut paraître quelque chose d'excessivement présomptueux pour une personne, et j'en suis gênée moi-même, pour vous dire la vérité, a un sens. Ce sens, c'est de définir ce que, face aux défis immenses qui sont les nôtres, sont aujourd'hui les droits et les devoirs de l'humanité. Les droits de l'homme concernent les droits et libertés de chacun d'entre nous. Les droits de l'humanité et les devoirs concernent l'ensemble que nous constituons, les chaînons des générations passées, présentes et futures. L'objectif de cette déclaration, à laquelle je suis heureuse de dire que deux éminents responsables de Green Cross, en la personne excuse-moi, j'ai un trou, Adam Kosniewski et Nicolas Imbert, qui doit être quelque part, ont beaucoup participé, collaboré. Cette déclaration est un document simple. C'est un document qui reconnaît 4 principes très simples. Celui de la responsabilité, de l'équité, de la solidarité. Celui de la dignité de l'humanité et de l'accès aux besoins fondamentaux. Celui du droit de l'espèce humaine à sa pérennité. Et celui de l'absence de discrimination temporelle, c'est-à-dire le droit au choix pour les générations futures. Suivent 6 droits et 6 devoirs, dans lesquels figure l'interdépendance que nous, les humains, faisons avec la nature. C'est un tout. C'est un document simple, je ne dis pas qu'ils doivent être gravés dans le marbre, et si, comme je l'espère, l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies s'en saisit, il est très clair qu'il sortira quelque chose de différent. Mais ce que nous avons voulu faire, avec un groupe de travail qui a énormément travaillé, et dans un esprit très ouvert, un groupe qui était constitué à la fois de juristes, de responsables politiques, de responsables d'ONG. Ce que nous avons voulu faire, c'est un document simple, acceptable à nos yeux par toutes les nations, mais surtout, qui doit être un outil majeur de la société civile. Et réfléchissant à la société civile, la manière dont elle pourrait porter cette déclaration, pour qu'effectivement, les chefs d'État et de gouvernement décident à la COP21 de lancer cette nouvelle étape dans la déclaration des droits, comme l'a dit le président Hollande à l'ONU la semaine dernière. Nous avons réfléchi à ceux qui pourraient être les mieux à même d'être les premiers porteurs, les premiers ambassadeurs de cette déclaration. Et tout naturellement, nous avons pensé aux jeunes. Et tout naturellement, pensant aux jeunes, nous nous sommes interrogés sur quelle organisation présente dans le monde entier pourrait porter cette déclaration, pourrait en être les premiers ambassadeurs. Et nous avons pensé aux scouts qui sont présents ici aujourd'hui, que je salue, que je demande de bien vouloir venir ici. j'ai plus le micro alors. Il ne marche pas. Il marche. Oui. Voilà. Donc nous avons une idée avec ces jeunes qui viennent de tous les continents, d'en faire des ambassadeurs de cette déclaration, pour que pendant 1 mois et demi, qu'il nous reste jusqu'au départ de la COP, je ne sais pas si ça marche, mais je pense qu'on l'entend, qu'il reste jusqu'au départ de la COP, nous ayons dans le monde entier des jeunes qui se mobilisent pour faire connaître la déclaration et pour obtenir des... Et nous avons imaginé un badge dont ils seraient les dépositaires, que vous avez ici, qui montre l'avenir avec des jeunes et moins jeunes, l'ADN, qui est la représentation de ce que nous sommes, n'est-ce pas, nous les humains en général, les espèces en particulier, le rappel de la Terre, l'océan et le sol, et puis le logo du scoutisme. Ça marche pas. Bon, je suis désolée. C'est bon là? Non, ça marche pas. Je vais aller là. Je vous rends ça pour que ça fait. Voilà, donc je détaillais le logo qui est très simple. Vous avez 2 visages, jeunes et moins jeunes. Vous avez l'ADN et vous avez la planète avec la planète bleue, les océans et la Terre et le logo des scouts. Donc je remercie infiniment le mouvement scout de se mobiliser. Je sais qu'il va le faire. Je sais qu'il va le faire de manière très active. Et y a-t-il plus belle représentation de cette responsabilité partagée, de cette chaîne des générations, que de faire des jeunes les ambassadeurs de cette déclaration de par le monde. Nous aurons le 2 novembre un événement qui donc va ponctuer le temps jusqu'à la COP, au cours duquel nous réunirons un panel autour de cette déclaration et j'espère que les scouts pourront être là et nous dire déjà ce qu'ils ont pu faire en 3 semaines. C'est très peu de temps, mais nous savons quelle est l'énergie de nos jeunes, nous savons comment ils sont capables de se mobiliser et je suis absolument confiante dans le fait qu'ils feront des miracles dans les 3 qui viennent pour faire connaître cette déclaration et y faire adhérer le plus grand nombre. Car ce n'est pas seulement une déclaration que les États devront signer. Nous sommes dans du droit international public, c'est les États qui ont la souveraineté. Mais c'est avant tout un message de l'humanité dans son ensemble. Nous avons des droits, celui de vivre et de faire en sorte que nos enfants et petits-enfants puissent vivre, mais nous avons aussi les devoirs qui vont avec. Et c'était la génération présente d'assimiler les devoirs, la génération passée, présente. Eh bien, c'est cela que ces jeunes vont porter, à la fois en tant que créanciers de ces droits, parce qu'ils sont les générations futures, mais déjà en tant que titulaires de devoirs, parce qu'ils font partie aussi des générations présentes. Je pense qu'il n'y avait pas de plus beau symbole et franchement, je me réjouis qu'ils aient accepté de remplir cette mission d'ambassadeur de la déclaration. Merci.
Joséphine va dire quelques mots. Joséphine va dire quelques mots pour les scouts. Qui est Joséphine? Bien, mesdames. Bien, mesdames et messieurs, je vais passer la parole à Joséphine, qui est scout, comme vous le voyez, et qui vient à la fois de l'Allemagne, Germany and Zimbabwe. Joséphine, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Dankeschön und Asante Sana. On behalf of this global network of 40 million scouts, I'd like to thank you all very much and to show our appreciation for this amazing recognition. All the scouts around the world have done something to contribute towards this, whether it be a scout from Thailand that is cleaning up the schools, or a scout from Ecuador that is part of a movement that planted 800,000 trees in one day, which broke a world record, or a scout from Sudan that is part of rehabilitating child soldiers through environmental projects. We are all very grateful for this recognition, and it is proof that you can count on us to continue to create a better world. Thank you.
Je voulais juste remercier l'intervenante pour cet engagement extrêmement fort. C'est magnifique. On ne peut pas attendre mieux de nos jeunes, et je dirais que dans ces temps où l'angoisse plane, où les menaces de conflit planent, où on exacerbe les différences entre les êtres humains, que ce soit les religions, les nationalités, les statuts, de voir la capacité de nos jeunes à se mobiliser pour un projet qui est fédérateur dans la mesure où il est centré sur ce que nous partageons tous, où que nous soyons et qui que nous soyons, celui d'être humain, celui de terrien, parce que pour le moment, comme dit Ban Ki-moon, on n'a pas de planète B. Eh bien, je trouve que c'est un signe d'encouragement et d'optimisme absolument formidable. Alors, merci à eux pour ce grand moment d'oxygène.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Lepage. Vous avez toujours une énergie et un enthousiasme débordant. Eh bien, je crois que c'est totalement positif pour notre planète. Continuez, s'il vous plaît. Mesdames et messieurs, vous avez maintenant l'occasion de prendre le café. Pause offerte par l'Université de Genève, je précise. On se retrouve d'ici une petite demi-heure dans cette salle pour la table ronde. Merci beaucoup.